common theme here, and this goes back and this shows that things never really change, and I passed out of IMCAL for 25 years ago now. The common theme here is all of you want to achieve your full potential. Somewhere, each of you feels that you have something to give to the world and to yourself, and you feel that something about what you do in these 2 years will help you get there. And this is wonderful, it's a great start. So all of us in some form want success, right, in our lives. So that success would be us wanting to succeed professionally, whether, through a conventional corporate career, or starting a company, or maybe, starting a corporate career and at some point branching off to start your own company. You want success in your personal life, relationships, you want to be happy internally, you want to be fulfilled. So the common theme is all of us want to be successful. And I think in the next 2 years, you have a lot of companies coming and pitching to you. You'll have a lot of people talking quote unquote corporate speak. You'll have people telling you, this is what our operations role looks like, and we're all looking for leaders, we're all looking for rock stars. Everybody looks for rock stars nowadays, supposedly. Yeah, and they'll all pitch to you about their companies, and there's a certain profile of the ideal candidate, and they talk to you about that profile. But somewhere, I feel that there are a few myths, a few misconceptions, a few beliefs that we have which need a little bit of looking more closely at. All of us, every single one of you in this room, is capable of succeeding in whatever it is that you set out. But somewhere, I think many of us are like an untuned guitar. We have the raw material, but somewhere we need things to be in synchrony, we need things to be in harmony so that it can produce a beautiful piece of music. Every single one of you is capable of producing that piece of music. But how do we tune that guitar? How do we tune ourselves for success? Somehow, one hears a lot of things, there is a lot of noise, 99% is noise. My objective here is to share my insights on how you can tune into that 1% and succeed in whatever it is that you set out to do. So, with that, maybe I'll start off by saying, what is success for us, right? Success definition is different for each of us, and this it goes by whatever people shared your respective thoughts. It's different for each of us. But one myth or misconception here is that we correlate success with results. Especially in the corporate world, you hear a lot about results. It's like, I don't care what the hell you're doing, I want the results. That's what you hear. But actually, success is not about results. Success is about the journey. So Jeff Bezos, right, who many of you will be following on social media. So, when Amazon reported a great quarter, a journalist congratulated him and said, wonderful quarter. And he said, I'm not even focused on this quarter. I'm focused on a quarter 2 or 3 years out. Because this quarter's results were already baked in 2 or 3 years ago. So success, the way we see it in terms of results, is actually an outcome. But the journey is what determines that success. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about myself, my own story. So I'll tell you 2 ways. One way is to say I started my career out of campus with Credit Suisse. I was in the equities division. I moved on to Deutsche Bank and then JP Morgan, where I headed the equity research team for India. During my tenure, Credit Suisse, the team that I led, the Asian Metals team, was ranked number 1 in Asia. I went on to work with a couple of private equity firms, AMP Capital and Macquarie, both Australian firms, invested about $1 billion in Indian markets. Somewhere I felt along the way that something was lacking, so I started writing. I was in Singapore for a couple of years with a large Vietnamese group called Masan. When I got back, I published my first book, Kanpur, which was a bestseller. It's been optioned for screen adaptation. Hopefully in a few years you'll see it on one of the OTT platforms. And I wrote the second book, Agrivan, last year. This was also a bestseller. I run a consulting firm, as part of which I coach CXOs and board members, helping companies with strategy, vision, and so on. And I write columns for newspapers. Now, what did I just do here? I talked to you only about results. It all looks very impressive, but this is less than 1% of the story. This is not the real story. You hear a lot of people talking to you about results, and their objective is to impress you. But that's not where you get to learn what's the raw material, the building blocks which went into succeeding. So I'll tell you a different version of the story, right? So I grew up in Tanzania, in Faraka. My school was across the Ganga River. Faraka is a small town in S.Venkatesh. Every day we used to cross the river, and it's just a beautiful sight. Somewhere there I started getting inspired to write. I used to spend time with my grandfather's, he had a huge collection of books. And that's when I somewhere developed the feeling that I could write. And then, like many of us, I got sucked up in peer pressure. I, went to IIT Delhi, did my electrical engineering, which I hated, by the way. And there was this whole one semester we just spent talking about how electron goes through. It's called a tunneling effect or something. After 6 months of that, I was like, I don't want to hear about electrons anymore, right? And somewhere in those years, it struck me that one has to look beyond peer pressure and find your own inner compass. And somewhere my inner compass told me that I wanted to pursue management, so that's how I ended up in IIM Calcutta. I was fascinated by the way money moves. I wanted to understand how, what's the correlation between money, the economy, and prosperity, well-being, and all that. So at Credit Suisse, I thought the best place to learn about that is in the investment banking world. That's how I ended up at Credit Suisse. The job was interesting, but there were some aspects I didn't like the grunt work, the complete absence of work-life balance. Some of our clients were demanding, which is okay, and I learned to cope with pressure. But some of them were downright rude, which was not so good. After a few years in the equities market, this is listed equities, the stock market, I felt that investing in the stock market doesn't give you a real insight into companies. You're looking at it from the outside based on publicly available information. You don't really get an insight into what keeps the CEO awake at night, for instance. I wanted to learn more about that, so I decided that I would apply for private equity jobs. That's how I ended up at these Australian firms. It was a great learning experience because you spend time while in investment banking you're looking at 10 companies a day. In the private equity world, you spend a few months dwelling on each company, spending a lot of time on it, spending time in the board, looking at strategic challenges. So it was wonderful. Yeah, it was wonderful. But somewhere along the way, I was traveling a lot, and I realized that some hidden urge to write from my childhood days was starting to reassert itself. So that's how, mostly on flights, I think there was a period of 2 years where I took 350 flights. So I checked with the stewardess, it was I think about half of what a stewardess does, right? So that was the time, and in flights, thankfully, there's no email, no mobile phones, nothing yet. And so this was my opportunity to look into my inner compass. And my inner compass was telling me that I wanted to write for whatever reason. So that's how my first book wrote itself. The first book actually was about a pandemic caused by a bioweapon. It was written well before the last 2 years. So there was some time when I spent researching about weapons of mass destruction. In fact, my wife was, when she looked into my computer, she was wondering what I was up to. So that's how the first book wrote itself. And along the way, I discovered mindfulness meditation. I learned it back in my IIT days, but I had left it for a long time. So interestingly, actually, writing and mindfulness taught me more about the stock markets than my entire previous 20 years of being in the stock markets. Now, what I've told you now is my journey, and it's different from the result-oriented, traditional success, I want to impress you template that most people follow, right? So that is one thought I'd like to emphasize today. Success is not about the results are an outcome of the journey. And there is something very redeeming in here, because you can have 4 people from the same institute with the same GPA or whatever, but there is something unique about each of them. That's your story, and that's why if you are in a job interview or pitching to a venture capitalist to raise funds or something like that, you have a unique edge because your journey is unique. Nobody can copy it. There was this famous influencer, I'm forgetting his name, Justin Welch on LinkedIn. somebody apparently was just copying all his posts into French or something and sharing it with the French audience. And when it was brought to his notice, he obviously complained to LinkedIn on Twitter or whatever. But he said, you can replicate my posts, but you can't replicate my journey because the journey is unique, right? So pay a lot of attention to your journey. Don't just get hung up on results. And if you follow the right journey, the results will follow. It's a matter of time. I don't know if any of you are aware of Benjamin Graham. He's considered to be the guru of finance. Warren Buffett regards him as his guru. So he, was asked to testify before a Senate committee or something. This is like 80, 90 years ago. And he was asked that if there is a good stock, how do we know that the stock price will reflect the fundamentals? And he said, I don't know. It's a mystery of our business, but eventually the stock price reflects the fundamentals of the business. It's the same with people. For each of you, if your journey has that merit to it, it will reflect in results, it will reflect in a good job or a good venture or whatever. It's a matter of time. So have that belief first. Second, your recruiters, your people who come to hire people or venture capitalists, if you want to go the entrepreneurial route, they will not know about your journey unless you tell them about it. Right? They will only see your results. In the absence of any information about the journey, people like to use results. So you need to articulate your journey to people. And that means you need to learn at this. It's become a buzzword now, like there are about 1 million storytelling gurus in India at the moment. But you should learn how to tell your story. You should learn how to articulate your journey. Because that's what is your unique edge. Right? The other thing, I think a lot of us, especially in an Indian context, there's this thing that self-promotion is bad. अपने मियाँ मिट्टू बनने की क्या जरूरत है? If you're good enough, even if you're in the Himalayas, people will come and find you. People don't. You have. If this was the case, then why do companies advertise? So please let go of the hesitation to quote unquote market yourself. The sooner you let go of it, the better. Because sure you could live like a hermit and somebody eventually will find you, but you could hasten the process by telling your story. Yeah. That's the first part. Okay, fine. So we know what success is. Success is about the journey. The result is just the outcome, right? So how do you go about finding something you can be successful at? Because even within the management field, right, there are a dozen subfields. There's, in finance, there is investment banking, there is private equity, there is commercial banking, there is lending, there is fintech. In marketing, there is conventional advertising, there is digital advertising. Even within advertising, you have the creative side, you have the client servicing side, etc. So how do you figure out where you can be successful? Because it's like, as I say, right? It's like Sachin. You can't judge a fish by its ability to ride a bicycle. It will always lose, right? So you have to find what your sweet spot is. Now, how do you go about doing that? The first thing you can do is explore, right? How do you explore? Just meet people, talk to people, read books. If you have an inkling towards finance, figure out what are the, I'm not talking about textbooks, but I'm talking about if you love stock markets, why don't you read Warren Buffett's letters, Berkshire Hathaway letters for the last 30 years? It will just take you an hour a day into 30 days. And you would have read, but if you can read 30 years of Warren Buffett's letters, you will certainly learn something big out of it. Right? So explore, listen, follow people on Twitter, the real guys who are, experts in your field. If you want advertising, read Ogilvy, right? I used to attend on campus replacement talks of companies that I wasn't even interested in, because you just get to hear from an industry practitioner, right? Even though I wanted, for instance, to pursue a job in financial consulting, but I ended up attending marketing PPTs because it just tells you a lot, right? So just explore. This part everybody will tell you, but the part that they will not tell you is you can keep exploring all your life, and it's fine and it's great and everything, but you have to explore mindfully. What do I mean by exploring mindfully? It means that along with exploring the outer world, explore your inner world as well. That's how you find your inner compass. So how do you explore your inner world? You have to be aware of how you respond to various things. Am I liking what I'm reading? Is something about this exciting to me? You know, each of us, and you learn this I think in org psychology, each of us has different motives and values. There is the achievement motive. So people who are mountaineers or athletes, they are high on this achievement motive. What that means is that they get their kicks out of outperforming themselves. They've got a milestone, even if nobody else is there in the world. A mountaineer, not all mountaineers have necessarily an achievement orientation, but what it means is that they get their kicks by bettering themselves. And they may benchmark to others, but the objective of benchmarking is to better themselves. That's achievement motive. All of us have the achievement motive. If you're all here, I'm sure all of you would have the achievement motive as well. But we have it in varying degrees. And that will, the degree to which you have it will tell you a little bit about yourself and the kind of jobs that you will like. There is the power motive. And power, don't understand it as, power hungry or something. Power just means a desire to impact and influence people. Right? So Mother Teresa probably was high on the power motive, because she wanted to influence others in a positive way. So many of you may have that desire, and there are certain jobs where the influencing aspect is more important. I met a musician recently. The musicians, many of them want to inspire or evoke certain emotions in the other person. That's part of the power motive. There may be a hedge fund manager, Ray Dalio, for instance. I don't know Ray Dalio personally, but he's one of the world's most accomplished hedge fund managers. If you read his book Principles, he strikes me as a classic achievement orientation guy. He wants to sit in an office and make decisions impact of which runs into billions of dollars, but he wants to outperform. He doesn't necessarily want to go out and run a company with 1,000 people or 10,000 people in it. That's not his objective. So when you go about exploring, when you go about finding what kind of work do various people do, talking to industry people, understand what each of those does to you. How do you respond to those? That's part of self-understanding. And you'll also read about Maslow's hierarchy, for instance. One rather colloquial way to put it is, पहले लोगों का होता था पैसा या power. अभी, I think in the last 20 years we hear a lot about following your passion. And in the last 10 years we hear a lot about your deeper purpose. Right? All of this is fine, but I think at some level just enjoy what you do, explore mindfully, just understand yourself. Right? Steve Jobs, for instance, story goes that Steve Jobs came to India. I think this was when he was, college or something like that, and he spent a year. He went to ashrams in the Himalayas. He went to the ashram of Neelkaroli Baba, and so on. And somewhere that exploring gave him ideas. So somewhere he felt that he didn't want to become a saint. He wanted to instead follow the path of Thomas Alva Edison, where he felt that Edison has done a lot more for the world by inventing or whatever, by discovering electricity than any Baba can. And so, somewhere he imbibed that. It's quoted in his biography that he felt inspired to follow Edison's footsteps and develop things which will be useful to the world. So exploring is not just exploring in the classroom or exploring in a corporate way. It can be being part of your college band. It can be being part of your college festival. I still remember I was coordinator for our college festival in Cal, and one day we discovered that half the money was gone. So we were just scrambling trying to figure out what the hell, but we discovered that there was the cash, whatever cash we had kept was there. So what happened? Then we discovered later that the accountant moved up and the money was there. But it taught me an important lesson. Cash tells you a lot more than accounting can. You will discover this later in finance. It's one of the most the most poignant lessons you can learn in finance in your career, which is cash flows are more important than accounting numbers. But so just explore. Now, when you're exploring, what are you looking for? We are all fascinated with overnight successes. We all feel कि यार कहीं lottery लग रहा है. This mentality, trust me, most of my peers, many of whom are CEOs of multinational companies, many of whom are international CEOs, they still have this mentality somewhere. What is this? Basically, we are looking, so, I've been in the stock market 20 years. Almost everybody I knew would try to somehow find the next big multi-bagger, which will go up, यार एक साल में 2 साल में 10 गुना पैसा बन जाए तो मजा आ जाएगा. And उस चक्कर में they will invest in lots of completely crappy companies. Even now, when I meet some of my friends who are active in the markets, they'll say, यार अगला 10 bagger बताओ. And 10 bagger ढूंढते somewhere over 20 years you lose your money on half of 10. All you had to do was just buy HDFC Bank stock and hold it for 15 years. You don't have to go looking for some godforsaken company, etc. So sometimes things stare you in the face, but somewhere we are trying to do this overnight success thing. Don't fall for that trap, right? Behind it, they say it takes 20 years to make an overnight success. I don't know if you've heard of this Chinese bamboo tree. So for 4 years, you have to keep watering and nothing happens. And then in the 5th year, suddenly in the course of 20 weeks, that tree will shoot up 50 feet. So that's your overnight success. That overnight success took 5 years in the making. Right now, why are we drawn towards overnight successes? Somewhere we feel, we need validation. Dusra, we don't trust the long term, we have a short term orientation. But more importantly, somewhere we feel we are not good enough. This is saying that fake it till you make it. Somewhere we feel that we need to fake it. I'm here to tell you today that not one of you needs to fake it. Each of you can make it. Edison tried, I think, a few hundred or 1,000 times before he succeeded with the electric bulb. Somebody asked him before, just a few months before he finally succeeded, you use so many materials, blah blah blah. Where are your results? He says, my result is that I know 1,000 ways that don't work. That's my result. I know 1,000 ways that don't work. And Edison finally succeeded. Same with Lincoln, you must have seen that forward about how Lincoln lost like 30 elections or something before he finally got elected, right? So each of us, we don't need to fake it. Each of us can make it. Each of us can be a Lincoln or an Edison. Now, how can each of you become that person? How can you become a Rahul Dravid so that in the interview, people will say, "Yeah, mujhe isko hire karna hai." You can, I'm sure you read a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise, right? How to dress well, how to eat with the fork, eat it with your right hand, eat it with your left hand, twist it around your neck, whatever the hell. Those are all fine. It's good to learn all that. But end of the day, Rahul Dravid is sitting in front of you. Even if he shows up without a fork and eats with his hand, people will hire him, right? As a cricketer. So how can you become Rahul Dravid? How do you do that? So the first part is you need to find something you're good at. We talked about that. There's a lot of talk about passion nowadays, right? How many of you have found your passion? Anybody? Okay, 1, great, wonderful. 2, 3, not bad at all. What if I may ask which field? Music. Music, wow, wonderful. My wife's a musician and music is her passion too. Yeah. Sorry? Social entrepreneurship, wonderful. That's purpose for you. Yeah. Trekking. Oh, that's great. So my partner in my business venture is a trekking enthusiast as well. So, but many of us haven't found our passion, and it's perfectly okay. Try to find your passion by all means. Try to dabble in different things. But कभी-कभी घंटी नहीं बजती है. Because many times finding your passion requires years. When I started working at Credit Suisse, to be honest, I didn't regard myself as a stock market investor. I was interested in how money works, but I was not one of those guys, yeah, agla stock bata. I was not like that. But over the years, it's become my passion. So passion sometimes takes time and effort. And what you need to do, though, is in your exploring, try to find something which makes you care enough to pay the price. So I don't know if you've read Dilbert, many of you must have read the cartoon, right? So Scott Adams, the creator of Billboard, made this very poignant statement. He said, success is actually quite easy. Just find the price and pay. Every profession, there is a price. I'm not talking about monetary price, right? So if you want to become, say, an investment banker, you have to be okay with 14, 16-hour work days. You have to be okay with crazy pressure. You have to be okay with the fact that you're working on 10 deals at a time and your attention span is splitting from one to the other. The first few years is going to be horrendous grunt work. You have to be okay with all that. If you want to be a successful stock market investor, you have to be okay with gut-wrenching volatility. Look at the grades. Warren Buffett, look at Berkshire Hathaway. There have been times when Berkshire Hathaway stock has been down 50%. Rakesh Jhunjhunwala in India. Look at his biggest holding, Titan. Titan has been down, I think, multiple times more than 50%. That's the price you have to pay. If you are not willing to pay that price, you should not be a stock market investor. Simple. I started on this journey of writing a book. I was writing Kalput, my first book, and somewhere along the way, I discovered after about 80,000 pages that there was another book written by somebody else with a similar premise. And if this was my first book, I wanted it to be really unique. I jumped 80,000 words. I just threw it in the bin, and I restarted it. Now, if you're writing a book, that's the price you have to pay, because you want to do a great job of it. You have to be okay. And there was, till I wrote my first book, because the day I had been in the corporate world, right? So I had no clue whether I can write well. And so there was no validation. Till the time that the book got published and finally did well, I had no clue whether it was going to do well or not. So you have to be okay with no validation if you want to be an author. Amish, who was my classmate incidentally in MDI, his first book, he self-published it. And he literally went shop to shop, talking to the owners, trying to make sure that the book was received well. He did extensive marketing himself. And then, of course, when the book was a success, then publishers came lining up at his door. So that's the price you have to pay if you want to become an author, which is, you may not get time of day initially. You have to contend with no validation. Every profession has a trade-off. Advertising, right? It's great, creative stuff, wonderful, but the deadlines are crazy, clients are unreasonable. That's the price. You have to be willing to pay the price. So the moment you find something very good about it, you may even want it for the money. It's perfectly fine. So you feel, yeah, enough. I really want to make a lot of money, and I found this thing sort of okay, but I'm so keen to make money that I'll take whatever trade-offs come with it. That to me is a perfectly fine motivation. You just have to, you may not find your passion and the love of your life, but as long as you find something where you're willing to pay the price, that's good enough. Maybe 10 years of doing that or 6 years of doing that, and once you made enough money, you can be doing other stuff. That's perfectly fine. So this myth that has been created, yeah, I have to find my passion, take your time about it. There's no need to be in a hurry. So now assume that you've found something that you're willing to give it your all. Right? I think only 4 people in this room have found their passion, but I'm hoping all of you find something that makes you care enough to do what it takes. What do you do after that? Any thoughts? What do you do after that? So, मिल गया चीज, अभी क्या करो? What do you do after that? Win the lottery? Work hard? Yeah. Work hard is easy to say, but difficult to implement. I know this from my own business school days. Just the act of waking up and getting to the lectures used to be quite difficult, frankly, at times. So, how do you go about it? A few things on hindsight which would have helped me if I had known it then. It's actually quite simple. Just get your routine a little in order. Just get enough sleep in the night, 7 hours minimum. I used to not get that many times because we used to be up till late, just, I don't know, we bought. But just get enough sleep. If possible, if you guys can learn meditation, do it for 15 minutes a day, that's good enough. 15 minutes a day is what is 1% of your day. Yeah, that's not a lot. Get some exercise, I'm sure most of you would play some game or the other. That's all you need in terms of your personal stuff. Sleep, exercise, and some form of meditation or self-awareness. Right? The other part is try to work uninterrupted. It's called deep work. That really helps. I don't know if you've heard of Bill Ackman, he's a famous investor. he runs a hedge fund, Pershing Square. He says that he doesn't even want somebody coming in the room and asking him for tea or anything because that interrupts his flow. I'll tell you a story. There is this writer called Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Have you heard of him? Ancient Mariner, right? So he was writing this. He was, I think, asleep, and he got this full poem, Kubla Khan, in his dream. He woke up and started jotting it down literally from memory, from the dream. Somebody knocked on the door to ask him for some papers or something like that, and that's it. He lost that entire chain of thought, and to this day, the poem Kubla Khan is unfinished. It's an unfinished masterpiece. So, deep work, you will be surprised once, and deep work means devote like 1 or 2 hours to this exploring thing, read the experts, read Warren Buffett's letters, read Ogilvy, read whatever is suited to your, field of choice. But do it deeply, which means don't interrupt, don't check your WhatsApp and social media and all that. Just you will be surprised how the world starts opening itself to you. Newton, it was written about Newton that he would stay with the same problem for weeks at a time, and he said that if you stay with the same thing for weeks at a time, it will open its secrets to you. It will open its secrets. Even Einstein said the same thing. He said it's not like I'm more intelligent than the next guy, it's just that I stick with problems longer. So persist, stick with problems, yeah. And so that's the way. So once you found something, start off exploring, understand yourself, what makes you tick, what you like doing. Once you found something, be willing to pay the price. If you're not willing to pay the price, then try to find something else. And once you found something, do deep work, get your personal stuff in order. I think anything more than what I said, get sleep, maybe exercise and maybe meditation for 15 minutes. I think anything more than that is too much to ask at this age. But that's it, and then you will realize over time that you get into the zone. It's like Virat Kohli on his good day. You will get into the zone in whatever it is that you're doing. That's how you become Virat Kohli or Rahul Dravid or whoever. I learned this pretty late, to be honest. It's only in the last 6-7 years of practicing mindfulness that I myself realized this. That's why I said that in the last 7 years I've learned more about stock markets than in the previous 20, whatever, the previous 18. The secrets will start opening themselves up to you. And imagine if you could go and tell a recruiter in an interview or a venture capitalist that you've learned whatever there is to learn. And just as an example, suppose you were pitching to a private equity fund, right? And you tell these guys that I've spent the last 2 years reading, understanding whatever there is to understand about stocks. I've gone out, these are the 10 companies in your portfolio. This is what I feel about each of these. I've called the company, I've been through their filings, I've talked to their distributors. Just imagine if you could do that, and of these 10 looks to me like these are good, and these are 10 other companies that you could invest in. And by the way, your profession, the price involved is XYZ, and I'm willing to pay that price. I think it's a compelling pitch, right? If it's an ad agency or if it's an FMCG company, you tell them, I've seen your ads for the last 10 years. These are all the ads. These are the ones which made a big impression on me. This ad reminded me of this ad from some other company. And hey, these are a few other ideas for your ads. And by the way, I know what's involved in FMCG. Initial 2 years, I'm going to have to go from village to village. I love that because I want to learn more about your consumers and your products. I'm willing to do that. I'm really looking forward to those 2 years in the village, and I'm really keen to build your brand. I think that's a compelling pitch. Yeah. So just 2 things: mastery and being able to do what it takes. That will get you there. One last thing. When you go into the world, you will be faced, and even to some extent in business school, each of us, हम लोग अपने school में, many of us are toppers, many of us are used to having an impression about ourselves. But somewhere along the way, we realize that okay, actually, I'm not that much I'm not Sachin Tendulkar, maybe. It's good to get real feedback. It's good to get real. There's no point going through life with an inflated ego or an inflated opinion of yourself. I think there will be a lot of people who will come and try to deflate you. That's part of the course, and it's a learning process. But, and and this is important, don't let anybody steal your dreams. Right? Your dreams are yours alone. Don't let anybody steal your dreams. Don't let anybody tell you that you are quote unquote not good. They can tell you that you lack a certain skill and you can learn that skill. But don't let anybody judge you as a person. And the way to do that is you have that shield, tune into your inner compass. When you achieve mastery, you will know it. When you achieve mastery in something, you will know it. You know, if let's say a musician gets a particular rag right, you must be familiar with this feeling. You don't need any audience to tell you whether you've got it right. Right? You will know it. And at that moment, you're one with the divine power. That's called being in the zone. In fact, scientists have done a lot of research on this. Apparently, there's something called alpha waves in your mind which get triggered off when you're in the zone. That leads to this like a lot of hormones, blah blah blah, feel good hormones, everything happens together. So when you're in the zone, you don't need anybody to tell you. It's a matter of time that you will get your due in the world. So don't let anybody steal your dreams. There's this old Chinese legend. Has any of you heard of this koi fish legend? Koi fish. Okay. Koi fish apparently are these really small fishes. They are found in this river called the Yellow River. Guangzhou. Guangzhou to पढ़ा हुआ geography में. Guangzhou का flood होता था हर साल or something like that, right? So apparently this koi fish, there was a legend that there is a huge waterfall in the Yellow River, and whichever fish climbs up that waterfall will get turned into a sparkling golden dragon. The gods will turn it into a sparkling golden dragon. That was the legend. And so there were thousands of koi fish. Some would try for some distance and then leave it because you have to swim against the tide, against the current. Sorry, right? So some fishes would try and leave it. Some would venture a bit farther. There was one small koi fish which actually reached the foot of the waterfall and started trying to climb up. It kept slipping along the rocks and the slippery boulders and all that, but it kept trying, and people started laughing at it. You know, the animals, the demons, everybody started laughing at the fish. But the fish kept persisting, and it took years, tens, dozens of years, and slowly started going up. There is this saying, right? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. Right? So the fish slowly made its way right up to the top of the waterfall. And it looked at its own reflection in the water, and it realized that it was actually a shimmering golden dragon. And what's the real meaning of the story? It's not like the gods turn you into the dragon. What it means is that somewhere the process of persevering, skating, makes you a master. There is an inner dragon in each of us that can be awakened. If at all there is one thing I'd like you to take away today, it is that each one of you can awaken that dragon in yourself. Each one of you, you don't need to fake it. Each one of you can be the best in your chosen field. Each one of you can be a master. And once you're a master, whether you're starting a company, whether you're going for an interview, whether you want to become a musician or start a company related to music, success will find its way to you. There's this speech that Nelson Mandela gave during his inaugural, when he took over, this was 94 or something. He said, he quoted from a poem, he said, "It's not the darkness which scares us, it is the light. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we may actually be more powerful than we can imagine, more powerful than we can handle. Each of you, I think, is more powerful than you think. But you have to give yourself the ability to handle it. And that's what you learn. That's the tuning of the guitar. That's why deep work. That's why getting your regimen in place. That's why mindful exploring. That's why all these things matter." Yeah. Thank you. This was all I had to say. Wishing you all the best of luck for your 2 years here and for your life. Any questions that people have?
It's been one step at a time, and the step is not really there. It's slightly zigzag, I would say. So, my undergrad was in psychology, sociology, and economics. I took it up mainly because I wanted to understand people better.
Sure.
And then I realized that we doing an MBA and then reaching a position of power, like so the power would help me do this at a larger scale. But I feel like eventually later on in life I would like to come back to individual or small, helping small groups. But nothing is set yet. I want to know if it's okay that no stone is set at the moment, and it might, the goal might change eventually. What is your advice?
What you said is wonderful. Yeah, this illustrates so many points that I want to make. First of all, goals keep changing. Second, trajectory is rarely unidirectional. It goes like this. Third, you don't know in which ways the dots will come together. There was this guy I read about. He's a robotic surgeon in the US, one of the best apparently. And apparently he used to have this habit of playing video games, and he was really good at it. And somewhere down the line, he realized that actually it's very similar to what you do in robotic surgery, and he's apparently one of the best robotic surgeons. There's this person that I used to know, unfortunately he passed away. He told me that as a kid he used to take apart toys, and his dad used to be really angry with him. Like he bought toys and he would just take it apart. Many years later, his passion was repairing motorcycles, taking them apart, putting them back, adding more features and so on. It's fascinating how things come together. So I don't know how things will come together for you. For now, go with the flow. Find something that you're willing to do whatever it takes for. Go with that. Who knows, 3 years later that might morph into something else, and then it might morph into something else. So I love investing. My first job, even though it was in the equities markets, it was actually as an equity research analyst. I think, to be honest, it was very far from investing. Equity research analyst's job is a lot of marketing and salesmanship, and only some amount of genuine investment analysis. But later on, I became a private equity investor. I now invest my proprietary funds, etc. So we don't know how it will come together, but it will. But at each point, be true to yourself and be present. Don't do something कि यार मजा नहीं आ रहा है, but मैं फिर भी कर रहा हूँ because मुझे ये credential चाहिए. Be mindful. Yeah, please.
So, my question is, you talk about deep work, and that can be done if suppose we are focusing on only one task. But is there any way in which we can accomplish multiple tasks at a single time and still be in that zone? So, are there any?
Answer is no. Answer is no. The brain, it has been shown that actually we are not that great at multitasking. Each time you flip from one task to another, it screws up the brain chemistry a little bit. So if you have a lot of tasks, and we all have a lot of tasks, I face this problem all the time, right? So in the morning I write my book, then I do conference calls with my overseas clients. Many of these are CEOs, they are sort of requiring some guidance, coaching, etc. Then in the afternoon, there's some completely different set of things. I sometimes do speaking, and in the evening, there are, some other, again, work-related deadlines, presentations to be sent across, etc. So it's very difficult to flip from task to task. What I would suggest is, at a time, do one thing. So people like Elon Musk, when he runs multiple ventures, right? So it's nothing. It's like he runs SpaceX and Tesla and Boring Company and all that. What he apparently does, when I read about it, is that he devotes one day to a particular function. So one day he just thinks about marketing across all the companies. Or one day he just devotes to operations, for instance. That's one way to do it. So try and see if you can reschedule the tasks so that each task gets maximum time of deep work. And in a way, what you're doing when you do deep work is you're being present. You're being mindful and present. If you flip from task to task, then you will not go deep. You have to just do it for a month or two, and you will start seeing that the level of insights you get is far deeper. So it happens with me with my book. If I do a little writing every day. Sometimes I don't get time, I do 15 minutes, 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes 3, which is other time milta nahi hai. But if I leave it for 3-4 days, I don't know, I stop getting ideas, I stop getting inspiration. On the other hand, if I do a little bit every day, I start getting more and more ideas. It's like the universe starts to conspire with you to help you out if you do deep work. I hope that answers your question. So try to find a way in which you can split the task so that each task gets more time. So instead of saying doing each task for 10 minutes each day, do one task for 2 hours one day and do another for 2 hours another day. That way.
Okay, thank you. That was it.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. So generally, as we progress in the career, we tend to be intimidated by the people around us, seeing the success. Like how to avoid that? Like we try to change our paths, seeing them. Like how to.
So this is a very common problem. There was a study done, I think it was done on our students or something, where they tried to see that, in absolute terms, does the money matter to you or does the relative part matter? So would you rather get, say, $100,000 to yourself, but if you are told that the next guy gets 140, how does that make you feel? Versus if I was to tell you that you will get only 80,000, but your neighboring guy will get 50. People seem to prefer the latter option. It's not the absolute number, it's apparently the relative comparison. So we are all wired like that. I don't know why, maybe it's old innate animal instinct. The way you can avoid this to some extent is to try to be more in tune with your inner compass. For me, for instance, when I left my last job, the first year after that, I left it to start this management consulting firm and do writing. The first year, I made 1/10 of what I made in that job. Right? It took me 4 years through my consulting business to reach that same level where I was 4 years ago. Now, I don't think I would have been able to do this if it was not for my inner compass. My inner compass told me I wanted to set up my own outfit. My inner compass told me that writing was important to me. So, I regarded conventional corporate ladder as being less relevant. Could I have done this 20 years ago? Maybe not. Maybe that was more important to me at that time. So, allow space to evolve over time as well.
My question is, right now, as you said, we are putting a lot of focus on passion. What are we supposed to do? The point why we are in the world, right? And for that reason, a lot of people are changing their paths. Many of them are failing. You are able to achieve it, but most are failing. So, is it really necessary to have a passion, or the thing that we are right now being fed, like you have to have a passion to follow in your life, otherwise your life is mundane. Is it very important?
So I'll just make one blanket statement, right? You don't have to have anything in life. Anything. Everything can be boiled down to what you want yourself deeply. Don't go by benchmarking against others. So there will be people who will tell you that, boss, you got to make X amount of money. There will be people who got to tell you this is the definition of success. You have to be in this position, or they will tell you that you're supposed to be having a passion. Like, look, I'm living my dream, and you are. None of that matters. Each person has their own independent trajectory. Respect your trajectory. There is this Sanskrit saying which paradharmo bhayava. Your dharma is most important to you. Don't follow somebody else's dharma. So how will you tune out these noises? That's why I found meditation helpful. You have something you're passionate about, music for instance, that will connect you with your inner core. You will be less influenced by these noises from outside.
So, in the beginning, you were talking about work-life balance and mindfulness. So, I wanted to say that I'm not really afraid of working hard, but I'm really scared of the toxic work environment because I've been a part of certain situations that made me anxious and uncomfortable. So, I wanted to ask that in such situations, how do we gauge the circumstances and how do we make the trade-off?
Sure. So this is unfortunately a common problem. Toxic workplaces are usually a result. Please say, toxic workplaces are usually a result of the people involved. Sometimes it is to do with the whole company, sometimes not. Sometimes it could just be to do with one division or one geography, etc. Again, here tuning into your inner compass helps. We are all endowed with a pretty sharp inner compass. It's like an animal instinct, right? The tsunami, when it came, the animals were the first, well before the tsunami actually came, they were the first to retreat. If you are in touch with your inner compass, you will realize when something is not okay. Just as we all know when somebody violates personal boundary, we know it. Sometimes we rationalize it, but everybody knows it. Similarly, when a workplace is getting toxic, somewhere you will know it. What ends up happening is, if you are not in tune with the inner compass, and somewhere what your colleagues tell you, what your boss tells you, it all starts getting to you. Unfortunately, it's very common. Because many such toxic workplaces don't even leave you with the time and energy to find your inner compass because you're just so sucked into the environment. In such cases, it's best to get an opinion from somebody external to the company, maybe a family member, maybe a trusted friend, and see if you need to remove yourself from the environment. Some situations, unfortunately, are just not solvable. It's just best in such cases to remove yourself from the environment. If you're finding yourself like in 10 jobs, each of those you feel is toxic, then you need to ask yourself, boss, is it that my definition of toxic is wrong? But it's very common, and often the best solution is just to remove yourself. The hope is that you retain enough of your inner compass and sanity to find out when it's starting to get toxic. To that extent, being in touch with your inner compass through whatever, jogging, cycling, swimming, music, it really helps.
So my question is that when we are generally looking for a career shift, there are a fair share of challenges. One that is external, that is the reaction of society, and one that is internal, like our own insecurity, a bit of anxiety, a bit of nervousness. So I would like to ask you that can you share your experience as to how you managed these amalgamation of emotions as well as the challenges from society, and what was your source of motivation that kept you going?
Sure. So, I experienced this, as I said, when I, for instance, studied and got into IIT. I was, frankly, it's an age where you really don't know what you want to do. So, I just followed peer pressure. The fact that, some of the academic stuff there, it's not just academic, I think just the overall field that I had chosen was not something which I particularly enjoyed. Made me realize that at some point in a way, I was starting to tune into that inner compass, realizing that this field is not for me. Now, there are other aspects which enter the picture. Many of us have been taught from childhood that we should please people. I've seen this. We should please people. We've grown up in school, always listening to our teachers, always making sure that the teacher is approving of what we do. Same goes for family settings as well. So somewhere we are hardwired to please other people. When you make a choice like this, you will have to displease some people. You have to muster up the inner strength to be okay with a little bit of dissonance, to be okay with some conflict, and to be able to do that. I'm just going back to the same word again, you have to tune into your inner compass. Some people are rebellious by nature, so they don't have to tune into the inner compass. They find it easy to go and piss off 5 people and be perfectly okay with it. Unfortunately, most of us are not like that, fortunately or unfortunately. So, we just need to learn to tune so much into our inner compass that we understand consciously that boss, ये मैं करूँगा, लोग piss off हो जाएंगे, but I'm reasonably convinced of what I'm doing, and I have the right to do that, and so I will handle that pissed off person. Handle them, just talk to them. If it's a person you care about, like your family, maybe you can try and make them understand your point of view. If it's people who you don't really care about, just don't bother about it. If I go back to my 20s, I would say the one thing I would change, if at all, is that I sometimes place too much importance to the opinions of a lot of others. It sometimes prevents you from experimenting.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to ask, as an author, do you face the writer's block? And if so, how do you overcome it?
Sure. So I face it all the time. Please see. So there are 2 things to do. It's very simple. A, write every day. There are days when you stare at a blank screen. That's perfectly fine. Still keep sitting in front of the blank screen. Devote that deep work time, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever. In that 2 hours, I don't stir from the seat. So there are days when for 2 hours, I've sat in front of the computer and not written a single word. That's perfectly fine. 2-3 days it happens, and 4th day you start getting ideas again. So writer's block is, to my mind, not a big issue, as long as you keep chipping away every day. The second thing, reason why writer's block happens is we all set a very high standard for ourselves. We are afraid of failure. So we feel that we should shab niklega main kalam se ye ekdam, this has to be perfect. There's a friend of mine who is a good writer actually, but he hasn't published a single book because he feels he's he's a fan of Joseph Conrad. And whenever he writes, he says, yeah, Joseph Conrad level ka nahi hai. Unfortunately, he's been doing this for 10 years and not written. So that fear of failure, which masquerades as perfectionism. Many of us, it's a, you go back interview में they ask you a question कि what is your weakness, and most people रटा करके जाते हैं कि weakness मेरा ये है कि I'm a perfectionist. I just love things to be perfect. And even Rishi Sunak, I was reading an interview with him a few days ago, and in an interview somebody asked him what is your weakness, and he said something to this effect that I work too hard, I don't delegate, I'm a perfectionist. So it looks like this virus affects everybody. But many of us, in the guise of perfectionism, it's actually our fear of failure. In my first job, it used to happen a lot. I would struggle to start a presentation, making a presentation, because I would feel it has to be perfect. Sometimes just start with the imperfect. Just start it. And it gets perfect along the way. Anybody else? Yeah, please.
So you spoke about mindfulness and how you've been practicing it for the past 6 to 7 years. So my question is, what do you think it does? What do you think triggers mindfulness in individuals? And you gave the example for Virat Kohli. So Virat Kohli, at least on an international level, made the major transformation after the failure in 2014 Indian series. So what do you think? Is it failure or is it very subjective and depends on people?
Sure. So, the first thing is, don't be afraid of failure. Failures are often stepping stones to eventual success. Listen. So, I advise many entrepreneurs as a coach, and every entrepreneur goes through multiple failures. Some of them are so, tough that they feel like abandoning everything altogether, and they literally pull themselves up. Elon Musk was asked, what words of encouragement will you give an entrepreneur? And his answer was, if you need words of encouragement, you should be an entrepreneur. It's just so difficult. So, there is somebody I know who's built $1 billion company over the last, it's taken him 20 odd years, and he said multiple times along the way, he was literally broken. So, failures, is part of the course. In fact, just like I was telling the lady there, that you need to be okay with some people being not approving of you. Similarly, you need to be okay with failing sometimes. That's also something we need to learn. You need to be okay with failing sometimes, you need to be okay with making wrong decisions sometimes. Because if you're always afraid of making a wrong decision, you will never take a decision. You see a lot of people, analysis paralysis ho jata hai. In one of the firms that I dealt with, there used to be this gentleman on the investment committee who just wouldn't approve an investment. Because he was just like analyzing, analysis paralysis ho gaya, because he's just so afraid that he'll make a wrong decision. Sometimes you have to let go and take that chance, take that leap. Yeah, please.
My name is Venkatesh. So you spoke about being mindful at all the time, but you also spoke about exploring.
Good evening, sir. I am S.Venkatesh. So you said that exploring is the best way to figure out the path that is the most suitable for you. But you also spoke multiple times about being very mindful while doing that, by seeing how we react to certain situations and what triggers the emotions in us. But how can we really work upon being mindful and see, like, improving our skills to make us more mindful and improve on our abilities to do so?
So how can your question is, how can you improve on your abilities to be mindful? Is that what you're saying? Well, frankly, the most effective technique I've realized is meditation. There are dozens of meditation techniques. Just choose any one and do it. That's the easiest one. 15 minutes a day is enough, but like with deep work, you have to do it every day. It's no point doing 1 hour one day and not doing it the next day. So in fact, while writing my book, that was the issue initially. I would write with inspiration, sit up the whole night writing, and then 2 months not write. Again 2 months later, inspiration, aaya, ghandi baj gayi, again you wrote. Again 2 months not, that doesn't work. You have to devote a little bit of time and do it every day. If for some reason you don't want to learn meditation, there are other things too. Just as I said, do some activity which makes you feel deeply connected with yourself. It could be trekking, it could be music, it could be jogging, it could be swimming, in a way that will help you to be mindful. And what do I mean by being mindful? It's really two things. One is be aware of what's happening to you. Have a seat, please. Be aware, for instance, of the effect that your surroundings are having on you. Be aware of the effect that a person is having on you. Be aware of the effect that a situation is having on you. Be aware. That's the first part. And the second part is that we are all hardwired to react in a certain way to a situation. We are, like, it's just programmed from not just birth but successive experiences. You know, some people, if they see a hostile environment, they just clam up. Some others, if they see a hostile environment, they'll start rebelling even before the other person said anything. So you have to understand how you are wired and try to be non-reactive. Non-reactive means it's difficult to explain. You will understand if you start meditating every day. It's what it means is you don't let that prior programming influence how you react. That's really what it means. So, you know, you go into a room, there's like hostile. It happens to me sometimes. In fact, more often than I want. You know, you, for instance, sometimes you have to make certain recommendations to a board of a company. The board may have individuals who are opposed to that recommendation. You go in, you can immediately sense it. This person is sort of got this, you know, he will not lean forward, he'll look back, he'll check his phone. You know that he's not wanting to engage with you, he or she is not wanting to engage with you. It's body language, you know. Then, you know, you say something, the person will come up with an inane type of counter to it. You know that this person is not so. This is a hostile situation. Now there are many ways to respond to it. One way, as I said, some people clam up. Another is some people go the people pleasing route. You know, it's like, मुझे इस आदमी का approval चाहिए, so I will try and please him. And then in the process, you dilute the recommendation you wanted to make. Whatever your prior disposition is, the simple thing to do is to not let that come in the way of how you react. This will be very useful for you in interviews actually. Because you encounter different types of people in interviews. Some will make you freeze, some will deliberately try to make you freeze and see your reaction. If you're aware of your reactions to people and to things, if you're aware of how you're feeling, if you're aware of your pre-programmed way of responding, you can start to make a change. Yeah. Trust me, if you know, I don't want to make this into a meditation you know, session, but if you guys are able to actually learn any form of meditation, do it for 15 minutes, that would be. I learned meditation, to be honest, when I was in my IIT final year, and there was this Vipassana camp where they would offer free boarding and lodging, and frankly, many of us thought, "Yaar, sahi hai, Jaipur घुमाएंगे, थोड़ा free में खाना मिल जाएगा." And little did we know, 10 days, no talking, no phones were not there, no newspapers, nothing. But it was a worthwhile experience. Frankly, I didn't do it for many years. It's only the last 6-7 years that I've restarted it. But yeah, so just be aware. If you don't want to practice formal meditation, just be aware. That's really it.
Entrepreneurs. So I wanted to know what is the common mistake that first-time entrepreneurs make?
Well, I told you about being okay to pay the price. Many people, I feel, get into entrepreneurship not fully clear that they are okay to pay that price. Entrepreneurship is pretty difficult in some ways because, you know, you see multiple times your product failing or not getting enough traction. Over a period of time, you may see that your peers who are in the corporate world have gone far ahead, and there's numerous difficulties you'll encounter. Customers don't seem to buy it even though you have a good product. Employees leave. You know, the rules and regulations sometimes may be a bit stifling. Competitors may play dirty. As an entrepreneur, you have to be okay with handling all that, and you have to be okay with the fact that your family will be sort of, you know, living hand to mouth. I mean, of course, if you are from a, you know, privileged background, that's fine. But otherwise, those sorts of things also start mattering. You know, and sometimes people haven't thought that through. You know, people haven't thought that through, so they're not prepared for the trade-offs. This is at the initial level, which is why most of the startups fail. As a startup starts doing well, then there's a different set of issues that come up. You know, founders not willing to let go, founders not willing to bring in multiple talents. You know, what works for you at $5 million of turnover won't work at $50 million. So those are other issues that come up. But to begin with, I think you just have to be willing to pay the price. Are you passionate enough about the idea? Passionate, or do you care enough about the idea to do whatever it takes?
Good evening, sir. So my question is that it is a great feeling to discover your passion at times, but a lot of times it happens that circumstances make it difficult for you to pursue it professionally. So how do you make peace with that?
Yeah, it's not easy. So, the desire to write for me, for instance, was there with me throughout, but somehow I just never found the time, and it would be very frustrating. The truth is, writing itself is very difficult to make money from it. There are literally, I think, just 2 or 3 authors who probably make enough money from writing. Both of them are my classmates, incidentally, in different places. So Amish was my classmate at IMCAL, and Chetan was my classmate in IIT Delhi. But it's very difficult to make a living as a writer, and I was conscious of that. Somehow, some sort of inner compass within me told me, therefore, that I needed to keep working in a certain type of job before I could finally feel the freedom to, take that risk. As I said, the first year my income was 110 from consulting, and make that shift where I tried to craft my life a different way, which is balance my management consulting venture with writing, and it's worked out fine over a few years. But you have to make those type of trade-offs. So music, incidentally. So I know somebody, for instance, who again had music as a passion, and he went on to start a venture connected with music. And then so there are things you can do which may relate to your passion. I met somebody recently who's passionate about cricket, and he started a cricket academy, an international cricket academy. So you may find something which is related to your passion, but which is not in the same way.
Exploring yourself. So this is one perspective of how I see myself. I keep exploring, and there's certain pattern of my personality traits that I portray in every role. But how does that leave an impression on the other party? Do they think that I'm being frivolous and I won't stick to a role or a certain, let's say a job role, I won't stick to a job role. How does the other party think?
Sorry, so you said you keep exploring, and what is the word you used? You keep changing roles.
Right, so let's say if I keep exploring, I don't know that, okay, this is my...
Got it. So what if you keep flipping from one thing to another?
Right.
So here's the thing. So first of all, what happens is that some of us use exploring as an excuse to not commit. Just as you diverge when you explore, you also have to converge at some point. Some people are on a perennial, what they call a tour bus. It's like being on a tour bus. मैं टूरिस्ट ही हूँ, मुझे अपना घर डेरा नहीं डालना कहीं पे. If that dynamic is at work, then you need to look into yourself and ask yourself why that is happening. I know a few people like that. They are somehow unwilling to commit, and so when the going gets rough, they quickly move on to the next thing. You have to ask yourself whether that is happening or not. You'll know that only if you keep this in your mind and make sure that you give each thing the due trial before you leave it for the next thing. So you have to guard against that. Is it possible that you are actually leaving when the going gets difficult? Because remember that even if you find your deep passion, you will still have a lot of rough phases, a lot of challenges and everything. It's not going to be smooth sailing. So are you just leaving at the first sign of trouble? That's the first question. If you realize that no, that's not the case, I'm genuinely not engaged or involved in this thing and I don't want to be in it, then tough luck. You will just have to make sure that you explain to your counterparty. Many of them might feel upset about it. As long as you're not willfully causing any damage to them, they'll just have to deal with it.
While I like to do something today, I've been doing it for a couple of years. And I really like it, but during my journey, I come across something that I like even more. How do I know that what I'm liking today is my purpose today? There is not going to be anything.
Right. So that's a tough one. In some ways, the decision is made easier by the fact that one also has to make a living and everything else, right? First, you have to also guard against the same thing that I mentioned, which is ऐसा तो नहीं है कि इसमें I like it, but something, it happens to people. They like a certain job, and then something happens, like you're the person you report to, or that person's boss, somebody like that, creates a bit of pressure on you, and the first thing you feel that yaar karte hain, dusra job mil gaya, that looks so interesting. Guard against that, because it's not like that's a toxic work environment. Pressures and demands are normal. So don't bail out at the first sign of pressure. So just make sure that dynamic is not happening. If this happens to you too frequently, then you have to ask yourself. But if it doesn't happen frequently, then yeah, sure, maybe there is something that you are even more deeply passionate about. And when the right opportunity presents itself, maybe you will make that change. And in some ways, as I said, you also have to make a living. So you may realize you're more passionate about something, but no opportunity may present itself. That's also possible.
About people needing validation. So I relate with that. So my question is how to get rid of the need of that validation.
How to get rid of the need for that validation. So if you ask psychologists, they'll tell you that one of the most important things that you can learn, which will help you function as an adult, is the ability to postpone gratification. Validation is a form of gratification. If you notice people who need validation all the time, what happens to them? First, they become people pleasers. They are always trying to please people. Second, you could get addicted to certain things, like substances or whatever, which give you that high. It's like a dopamine high. And nowadays with Facebook likes and everything, those also give people dopamine highs. So it's possible for people to get addicted to it. Generally speaking, a person who is able to postpone gratification almost invariably will do better. Because you can go through prolonged period, like an entrepreneur who can really stick it through. If like competitors try to beat you down, whatever, and he just sticks it through, he or she just sticks it through. Such a person is likely to succeed. Now, how do you develop that muscle of postponing validation? You will have to do it across your life. You can't be, addicted to some substance or addicted to social media stuff and then say that, but when it comes to my work, I'm going to postpone that validation. No nahi hota hai. It's an overall lifestyle change. It's your personality which has to change to one that requires less validation. For me, as I said, when I wrote the first book took me a few years to write, and I had to jump 80,000 words. And there was no validation. So now I write a column every 2 weeks, and I see, yes, I have LinkedIn mein, people are liking this, that. And my book sold X by whatever copies. But at that time, I had not written a book, I had not written anything else. It was just my work-related stuff. So there was no validation for the writing part. The only thing which kept me going was the fact that I had sort of learned the art of postponing that gratification. I didn't particularly mind that for 4 years I had no clue how I would succeed as a writer.
So, sir, good evening, sir. My name is Kavish. First of all, sir, I'd like to say that really envious of authors because they can make such beautiful stories in 350, 400 odd pages and inspire people and entertain them around the globe, millions of people. So, and we as readers, we finish book in 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours odd time. But the journey of the book is, as you said, you put more than a year, so more than 10,000 hours, right? So I just wanted to ask, what is the journey about your book, right? Did you have a story in your mind? How did you start writing? Was it line by line? Was it chapter by chapter? Did you have that ending? And you said that you had to, restart the book after 80,000 pages. So was it difficult next time, or was it the same as when you started writing your first book?
Sure, thank you. So, the first book, Kalpoon, and my second book, Agniban, wrote themselves in very different ways. The first book, I just went with the flow. That's why this 80,000 word problem happened, because when you go with the flow, it's quite torturous. The ideas sometimes don't add up. It's a thriller, so the mystery has to come together. You may realize after writing for a year that, yeah, this is not adding up properly and you have to redo the thing. So that took me longer and it was a bit more difficult. The second book, I did it a different way. A lot of writers use this method, which is you outline the chapters. So I took a good 8-10 months to outline it. Not 8-10 months, maybe 6-8 months to outline the chapters, which means that this is going to be the flow. Only after those 6-8 months, I actually started writing it. And the writing part took me hardly 4 months because I had the chapter flow written down. And this problem of suddenly after writing 50,000 words, I realize it's not adding up, that doesn't arise. So people use both methods. The first category of authors are called pantsers, you go with the seat of your pants. The second set of authors are called plotters because they plot it before you start writing. Yeah, this holds true for life also and careers also. Some people just make it up as they go along. Some people have this like 20-year plan. As they say, right, John Lennon had this quote that life is what happens to you while you're busy planning for it.
Sir, I'm good. You talked about to market yourself, and I feel that I sometimes tend to hold back on this aspect. So, what steps could be taken so that I can put myself out there?
Sure. So, the first thing, I think, and the biggest thing is to try and get over your own inner inhibitions around it. Are there some beliefs which are stopping you from doing this? Do you feel that you would come across as cheap, or do you feel you will get disapproval from your peers? Do you have certain beliefs? So, challenge those beliefs. That is what I would say. After that, learning how to market yourself, there are a dozen courses, dozens of influencers who keep talking about it. How to market yourself on LinkedIn, how to market yourself on X, on Y, how to do storytelling. You'll find a lot of material online, but that comes later. If you notice, the common theme in everything I'm saying is look inward, get yourself sort of primed, like that tuned guitar, and then you need to question these beliefs. What are these beliefs you have? What is the source of those beliefs? Have you been taught growing up that, sort of don't छोटी मुंह बड़ी बात नहीं होनी चाहिए, those sort of things, those sort of beliefs play a big role. What are those beliefs? How you will find out whether those beliefs are coming in the picture is when you are in a group or when you are, say, in an interview. Do you hesitate for some reason? In fact, interview may not be the right place. Maybe when you are in a group, sometimes if you have something to say, something important to say, do you hesitate? Why do you hesitate? Ask us. This is what I meant by tuning into your inner compass. Mindfulness, right? So if you're in a group and you're hesitating to say, maybe just something like, yaar gaana kaun sa acha lagta hai, and you love a particular Kishore Kumar song or whatever, but you feel कि यार लोग क्या सोचेंगे Kishore Kumar तो यार पता नहीं 10th century में था, people will make fun of me. I don't know, people like Kishore Kumar. Oh really? Wow. Okay, that makes me feel less old. But you just feel that this is not so cool to say. What is preventing you? What do you fear? Are you fearing disapproval from your peers? Or is there just some inner thing ki yaar zyada apne ko? What is that belief? Once you understand those beliefs, then you will be set for the next stage, which is there is a lot of material online on how to market yourself, in an interview, how to market yourself online, how to market yourself in a social gathering, how to market yourself in a profession. There's enough material on that. That to me is the easier part.
Good evening, sir. My name is Arjun Putera. First of all, thank you so much for this wonderful session. Since you are an author, maybe you could tell us about some authors and books you enjoy reading.
So my the authors I love is an eclectic mix. Have a seat. So I grew up reading a lot of thrillers, which is why I started writing thrillers. There's like the usual Frederick Fawcett, Alistair MacLean, Robert Ludlum, and so on, John Le Carre. I grew up also reading some books which are sort of take you to the edge of the human experience. Your Animal Farm, 1984, William Golding's books, Aldous Huxley's books, and so on. So those I love reading. I love reading some books on philosophy actually. There's this book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's a short book. It talks about his experience in the Nazi concentration camp. And more importantly about, again, what he learned about human behavior and human psyche there. Then in terms of, I read some of the commentaries on the Upanishads, which were quite fascinating too. There's this ancient Chinese text called the Tao Te Ching. It's a small book of verse. It talks about mindfulness, so I like that as well. And of course, I'm passionate about the stock market, so I've been reading a bunch of books. I think Benjamin Graham, Philip Fisher, Seth Klarman, if you can get your hold on it, a hand on his book, and sometimes just reading investor letters of some of these investors. So as you can see, it's an eclectic sort of mix. But read whatever comes to mind, frankly, whatever you love. So even writing. So my first two books were thrillers with a historical angle. So same genre as Ashwin Sanghi, Dan Brown, and so on. My third book, which should be out by probably Jan or Feb, is a thriller set in the stock markets. So completely unrelated. The first two books are different. The fourth book is going to be non-fiction, something related to mindfulness. So yeah. Wonderful. This was wonderful. Actually, I love the energy in the room. I think with this kind of energy, you all have a bright future ahead of you. So, best wishes to everybody. Yeah.